Saying that Resident Evil is a genre-defining series would be quite the understatement, and what better way to celebrate this than to explore the very first release. It's got tight resources that make you think about every single bullet that you're firing, claustrophobic camera angles, and overall just a really tense atmosphere. It really forces you to slow down and think about every single encounter. And it's built quite the legacy, still influencing games today almost 30 years later. And as we approach the 9th installment in the mainline series, as well as it being released on the 30th anniversary of the game, now's a better time than ever to get into the series for the first time, or just replay it for the 50th. But here's the thing, the original Resident Evil has been re-released and ported so many times that it would make Skyrim jealous. And not all of them are made equal, with some of them removing or changing content, and in some ways the fan-made versions of these games are the best ways to experience them. And a lot of this fluff leads to frustration and confusion when all you want to do is just play the game. So if you're looking to play Resident Evil 1, which is the version that you should play? Well, today we find that out by breaking down everything, comparing all of the versions that are playable on PC, as well as what mods, settings and tweaks you can do to each one of them in order to make them look as good as possible. And then hopefully by the end, we can answer that age-old question: what is the best way to play Resident Evil 1? But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Instant Gaming is a place where you can get loads of games that you love at discounted prices. The best thing that I love about Instant Gaming is the fact that you go from buying a game to just playing it within literal seconds, because the website design and the checkout design, that all just gets out of your way and lets you just buy games really quickly. I've been on this platform buying games since 2018 and I have not had a single issue. So if you're interested, use my affiliate link in the description to save yourself some money on great games, whilst also supporting the channel. Anyway, back to exploring Resident Evil. Now first I want to lay some groundwork for this video. I'm going to be covering the original Resident Evil 1, but I also will touch lightly on the remake as well. They are both different experiences, but I wanted to include them just to be complete here. However, playing the remake is a lot easier than the original, so it's going to be cut a lot briefer than the original section of this video. We are also going to be covering quite literally everything, even the ports that may not make sense. We will cover them just to make sure we've covered all grounds possible. And then at the end we'll wrap up all of the evidence that we find and go through the pros and cons of each, and which one I think is best for the certain type of player. Some of the stuff I talk about in this video though is quite subjective, so if there's something that you just don't feel is quite right, or you don't really agree with, that's totally fine. That's the beauty of the PC platform. You get to create the experience that you want to. So if there's any mods or settings or anything in this video that you don't like, just ignore them and move on. Let's first take a look at the original game before we mention the remake. There are many versions of this PS1 game, but first let's go over where it all started, and that's the original 1996 copy of Resident Evil that was released in the West. We can run this version using the DuckStation emulator. This standalone emulator is amongst the best and easiest to set up, and also offers so much in the way of customization. Before we get too ahead of ourselves though, let's lock in which version is best, as like I've said, there is 3 here. Well, this original version is different from what Japan got, receiving a few changes here and there. For starters, all of the FMVs were drastically censored compared to the Japanese release. They play in complete black and white in this version, and any and all gore is censored completely. For example, there are sequences missing here like a rotting corpse in the intro, and then not much later there's the iconic zombie head turn scene that has a snippet of gore at the end that is missing. These uncensored scenes are only the first few minutes of the game, so it's not a huge negative, but it's worth pointing out. In terms of gameplay though, it's actually basically the same, minus some difficulty adjustments. This game is pretty unforgiving, with tough enemies, low supply of ink ribbons, and the aiming is really quite finicky. And funny enough, this was done on purpose by Capcom, or so the community likes to think. You see, I'm sure many of you watching, including myself, remember going to a Blockbuster as a kid and, renting games because you couldn't afford to outright buy them as a kid. It was safe to say that the idea of renting games in the West was extremely popular in the 90s and 2000s, but renting, to my surprise, is actually something that's banned in Japan due to some copyright laws. And this is the suspected reason that the Western got these difficulty changes, because it almost forced the Western audience to buy Resident Evil since it was too tough to finish in a night or two before the rental time came up. pretty smart move, to be honest, from Capcom, and I guess it worked because this game sold over 1 million copies in the States alone, making it the top 3 best-selling home video games according to Wikipedia. Coming back to modern day though, what this means is that you just get a harder Resident Evil 1 if you play the Western version. I died more times than I'd like to admit in this version trying to get some footage. Now I'm not super skilled at games, but I have played every single Resident Evil mainline entry, so I think new players here might have a really difficult time getting the hang of things. Especially the lack of auto-aim. The gun just doesn't snap onto zombies at all, let alone their head, making you waste a lot of bullets. The other versions, however, do have this feature, and that's why I specifically enjoy the Director's Cut version a lot more, so let's talk about that one. This version features some new content, like 2 new modes, one called Arrange and the other called Beginner. These two have slightly different names depending on what version you have or regions, but they are the same thing. Arrange mode basically gaslights returning players into thinking that items were there when now they've been remixed to be somewhere else. This mode has Chris and Jill in some new outfits as well, which look pretty cool. Jill's one is equipped with some extra ballistics for some reason, and I guess it's the 90s so we can excuse it. This mode also has some really interesting new camera angles as well. Beginner mode, however, it's pretty straightforward. It makes the game easier. It increases the player's life and their weapon's firepower. There are also some minor things as well, like the quantities of ammo and ink ribbons being doubled. But here you can see the time that it takes for this zombie to kill me in the beginner mode versus the normal mode is actually quite substantial, so if you're scared about this game or you want something easier, then the Director's Cut is for you. There are so many other additions, but I just want to go over the ones that are most noticeable. Like for example, Capcom notoriously fumbled the bag with this release, because leading up to it they marked it as being the uncensored version of the game, with all of the uncensored gore that the Japanese release of the game had. But release happened and people quickly realised that the footage was not there. Capcom responded to this, basically putting the blame on the developers and the localization, and then as a token of goodwill, offered the uncensored intro as a free download from their website. You'd think then that they had learned from this mistake and all of the uncensored FMVs would be in every re-release that should happen. But no, the third and final re-release, which is the DualShock version, it's again missing the uncensored FMVs, with the back of the box just now not mentioning the uncensored content at all to avoid any confusion. Because it's missing from the box though, I'd imagine that this was done on purpose, but I really couldn't find whether they just made the mistake a third time or they just could not include it this time. The thing is though, since we know these uncensored FMVs are only in the first few minutes of gameplay, I really don't think it's too much of a deal breaker. And when you combine that with the fact that we are getting the original Japanese release difficulty with auto-aim to make shooting way easier, I still would recommend the Director's Cut over the original, as I really like the extra stuff that's included. The DualShock version though, that's a complete different story that we need to get into. This DualShock re-release simply added support for DualShock vibration function, as well as a new soundtrack that many found inferior to the original. This features the notorious Basement track, which is considered by some to be one of the worst video game compositions of all time. Take a listen to both of them back to back and see what you think. Yeah, not pretty. From what I found online, it's presumed that this was an error that was not found until it was too late in production. I'm not sure if we ever found out what the original was actually supposed to sound like, but it was not supposed to sound like this, and it was likely a sound font that got messed up during production. Besides the OST being messed up and the added DualShock rumble, there isn't really much else to note here. So out of these three, to no surprise, I recommend the Director's Cut. The standard one, not the DualShock version. There is however a secret fourth option though, that if you're willing to put the effort into getting, can make the experience as best as it can be, and that's the fan-made ROM hack called True Director's Cut. Some of you probably have already guessed what this does by the name, but it just takes what was good about the DualShock version, so basically only the rumble, and then brings back the original soundtrack. Then it adds stuff found in beta or trial versions of the game, basically cut content. To patch your DualShock version of the game, it is somewhat easy but can be confusing. You need three things. First, the DualShock version of the ROM of course. Then X-Delta in order to apply the patch. This is actually included in the ROM hacks download, so you don't need to get it separately. And then the patch itself. Inside X-Delta you just need to fill the boxes here. The first one is going to be where the patch file is. The second one is going to be where your ROM is. Your ROM is most likely uncompressed like mine, so you're just going to select part 1 as that's the only one that we need to patch. And then for the output file, just give it a completely different name. It's important though that once the patch is finished, close all of this down and then rename that part 1 file to what it was before, either deleting the original or moving it out of the folder for a backup. After trying out this version, I want to keep a level head here and just say that there's truly nothing super noticeable here for me to scream and yell that everyone should go grab this version. But if you want an actual true director's cut and are willing to patch the ROM, then you're gonna get a better version than the others with all of the uncensored stuff. For anyone with time constraints, no technical know-how, or just doesn't want to do it, then you can just watch the uncensored FMVs online as they pop up. There's really only like 2 or 3. You'll still have the exact same experience, just minus the vibration feature. Now with the versions out of the way, we can actually get to talking about the game itself and how it runs on DuckStation. You can change the settings by going to settings and then game properties in order to only affect this game. For starters, performance on the Vulkan renderer is basically flawless. I recommend everyone use Vulkan, by the way, because it allows you to use PGXP, which gets rid of the wobble that these PS1 games have. And an extra note about PGXP is it's not only important that you enable it using this option, but you also enable depth buffer in order to get rid of any Z-fighting. That's this effect where body parts of the character flicker over the top of each other. If you just want to copy some settings that should be good for everyone, then these are the ones that I landed on. The only ones that I'd recommend you change yourself are the internal resolution. Just set this to your monitor's resolution, or what I like to do is bump it even higher, which will introduce some super sampling. That'll give you a clearer image and smooth out some of the jaggies, but can and will have some artifacts. Downsampling is another one that's extremely subjective, but also important for this game as all of the backgrounds are 2D. And why that's important is that if you set this option to preserve 3D but smooth 2D, then what it's going to do is smooth out all of the 2D backgrounds, downsampling it all the way back down to its native resolution. This is better than just running it native because you're downsampling from a much higher resolution, but this really is personal preference. If you want a smoother background image, then go with this option, but if you want super crisp pixels all across the board, then just leave it off. I also enable some anti-aliasing in the advanced tab in the form of SSAA multi-sampling. There are, however, alternatives like different texture filtering techniques, the most popular ones being XBR and GIN-C, but both offer really odd looking results in my opinion. And then there's bilinear, which just makes everything way too blurry. There are, however, 2 new methods that were added quite recently. MMPX I think is one of the better ones to go for, and then Scale 2x or 3x have similar results, but I do prefer 2x as it's a little bit less aggressive. Another good comparison is the HUD, where I think that Nearest Neighbor comes out on top here. If we factor in the newer methods though, Scale 2x and MMPX are very similar and both do a great job. Here's those next to downsampling. Now it sucks that YouTube's compression probably makes these comparisons a bit hard to notice the differences, but this does really come down to whether you want a smooth or sharp look. Also, if you're on a variable refresh rate monitor setup like me, either G-Sync or FreeSync, then I would strongly advise that you turn on optimal frame pacing. It's important that when you do this, you leave V-Sync off to ensure that you're getting the smoothest image without any tearing. Pair this with turning G-Sync or FreeSync on in your control panel for full screen only, and then also globally set V-Sync to on. I'll link a website on G-Sync and why setting V-Sync with G-Sync is important if you're interested. For anyone without, you can just leave this by default to be honest, but you can play around with having V-Sync on if you're experiencing any screen tearing. Of course, with this being the original OG way to play Resident Evil, I think it's pretty fitting that despite us getting it to look pretty crisp, we realise that if you play it at native or slightly lower res like 720p, we can put on a CRT shader to replicate the TVs of the time. And this is a really cool way to play this game. There are actually some already inside DuckStation, but I'm instead going to recommend you get ShaderGlass. It's basically just a window that you put over the game and you can full screen using Ctrl-Shift-G. This has been my new go-to when it comes to putting shaders on pretty much anything that I want to, and it's just so much simpler than RetroArch or Reshade. Also, these things have come a long way. There is so much customization here to basically make the CRT monitor that you see in your head. If you want the most accurate shaders that are about, then the PlayStation 1 preset by Retro Crisis is probably going to be your best bet. It's also pre-installed into ShaderGlass. It's under the RetroArch library folder. There's 4 versions to choose from, and you basically just want to pick the one that looks best to you. You can also change the pixel size in here. By default it's going to be 3 times, which I'm unsure what the resolution here, but it doesn't look very crisp. If you want it to just stay your monitor's resolution, then just set it to 1 times. Basically, the higher this number goes, the more pixelated and retro looking it's going to get. So in DuckStation you can adjust it to be native or 720p resolution, but what I recommend doing is just switching to software mode for the renderer, and you'll have the most authentic experience possible on a modern PC. Besides graphics settings, you can also enable achievements by going to its respective settings menu and logging into retro achievements. You'll be asked about hardcore mode. Now if you like save states, then I would leave this off as it's going to disable those. Off still tracks your achievements and displays them on your retro achievements profile, but it just doesn't submit you to the leaderboards. There'll be a pop-up when you first load up the game to let you know that it's set up correctly, and then one whenever you unlock an achievement. It's worth noting that this is only available for the original game and the standard director's cut. So if you want achievements, you unfortunately can't play the true director's cut or the DualShock version. Unlike later titles, this version does not have quick turn, meaning you have to slowly turn your character before you can run away. However, there is a cheat to enable quick turn, but for some reason, it's only available for the game properties of the director's cut version. I guess yet another reason to go with that one. There is no door skip function either in any of these as far as I know, so that makes overall loading times quite long here. What I did though was just hotkey the emulator's fast forward feature to a button combo on my controller and then toggled that to speed it up. You can also do the same thing for any cutscenes you want to skip as well, as there's no skip button. There's also a little hitch that happens when you change scenes. Something that's noticeable and annoying at first, but you do end up getting used to it. Overall, we're off to a pretty great start with this version. It's got a nice robust emulator to play it on, and since it's the original game, we're getting a true authentic RE1 experience. This game received its first ever port before the release of the director's cut, and it was for the SEGA SATURN, beating the PC version port by about 3 weeks. This is a really interesting one as well because it does feature some exclusive content that was never ported to any other version. Battle Game Mode, which is actually a precursor to the fan favourite Mercenaries game mode, was one of those things. To unlock it, you either beat the game or just enter a cheat code while on the press start button screen. In this mode, you gotta kill all of the enemies before the game automatically puts you into the next room. It's quite fun, but since it's an entirely different game mode, we aren't really that interested in it for this video. And the real kicker here is that, like you've been seeing in this gameplay already, you actually cannot increase the internal resolution with this emulator. And the emulator in question is the Beetle core running inside RetroArch. The SEGA Saturn is just a really complicated thing to emulate, so there are just seriously things lacking in terms of compatibility, features, and performance. Chronos is another core that many think is better for 3D games as you can increase the internal resolution, but with nothing similar to PGXP, you just get a really weird wobbly character model. This core also just runs the game at 2 times speed for me, which I didn't find out why. Back to the Beetle core, it's fine, just not ideal. The short lag spikes mentioned when you switch from different camera angles is present in this version as well, but is now accompanied by a flash which is super jarring, and overall, besides poor emulation, the console just wasn't as powerful as the PlayStation 1. Making the whole port feel really lackluster. Therefore, we sadly just have to cut our losses with this one. I don't see a reason why you would play this on PC outside some experimentation or trying out the battle mode. So let's just move on to the next port, which is definitely much harder to get hold of, but has the potential to be the best way to experience this title, and that's the PC port. Now anyone that knows, and is probably screaming that why am I even covering the original port when the GOG re-release exists? But I think it's just as important to start with this original port first, because a lot of this can be carried over to the GOG version, and I just want to see the differences. The original version of the game was officially ported in 1996 via a Japanese software company. And in simple terms, it took everything on that original Japanese version of that game on PlayStation and made it run natively on PC. That means that we get all the uncensored stuff from the Japanese version, which is great for obvious reasons. Now the actual version we want isn't that original PC port. We want the MEDIAKITE version, which I believe was a reprint or a re-release of the original, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that the modding community recommend getting this version. It's however not sold anywhere officially, so the only legal way to get it is via secondhand marketplaces. Once you get your hands on a retail copy though, it just does not work. From my experience, it just was throwing errors at every step of the setup. Therefore, what you need to do is drag the biohazard.exe and some folders inside the HORR folder elsewhere in order to manually install it. Even that won't be enough though to get this thing to run, as then just double clicking the exe will give you another error. That's where Rebirth comes in, which is an extremely extensive mod made by the community to overall fix this PC port. And it's just a single DLL file that can be drag and dropped next to this exe, and it fixes a tremendous amount of stuff for this now forgotten PC version. There is a patch file to just patch over your .exe in order to make sure that it's the most up-to-date MEDIAKITE version. Loading this presents you with a config that has a ton of options, but I just recommend clicking the best button at the bottom in order to give you the optimized settings. This enables things like quick turn that we mentioned, so now you can quickly turn around by pressing X whilst holding down on the D-pad. The only thing that I think you might want to change here is the texture filtering, as this by default adds a bilinear filter to the textures that some might find quite blurry. Is with it off and on just to give you an idea of what it looks like in game. After loading into this version, the first thing that I noticed was that the FMVs are absolutely terrible. They not only have Japanese subtitles, but they are extremely compressed compared to the ones that we had on the true director's cut. There is however way less compressed versions of these that you can just download from the Rebirth website and then just drag and drop them into your game's directory. There is also a really similar mod for the audio as well, as that can be pretty compressed in this version.
What is it?
Watch out! It's a monster!
Let me take care of this.
Since these are really simple to get, I'd recommend them no matter what, as without them you're just getting a worse experience. You can skip the door animations in this one, which is great for any returning players that don't want to sit through them. For performance, it's just as smooth as the emulation, if not more stable due to being no emulation overhead. The stutter when moving between camera angles as well is also gone completely, making this by far the smoothest experience possible. In terms of visuals, they are really sharp when compared to the PS1 version, and especially compared to the SEGA Saturn. The PC port for loads of these games tend to be broken, but when you get them working, super sharp, so it's no real surprise that this comes out on top over the emulation options. There are some pretty harsh jagged lines though because of that, and there's no support for built-in anti-aliasing, so you're just going to have to enable it through something like your graphics card control panel, as I tried Reshade but it's just super hard to get working on such an old game. There is one more mod I want to showcase, but this one isn't as cut and dry, and that's the SeamlessHD. If you want the cleanest looking visuals, then this is by far the best way to do it. And now I appreciate the effort that went into creating this mod, as it's hard to take these super dated 2D backgrounds and magically make them look modern without completely redoing them. And I don't expect them to redo them because that would require a huge amount of time and a massive dev team behind it. And so the results are good in some parts, but just not that great in others. I think for me though, having already played this game before, it's something that I could see myself playing the game with on a replay, but if it's your first ever time, I don't think this is the right thing to use. For example, text on things just get a really melted-like appearance. It can also make everything just look really vibrant and almost toy-like. There's a certain smoothness and shininess to everything that I just don't really like. That's obviously just my take though. These are clearer and they do an incredible job at upscaling what was there. And if you look at them side by side, the originals are just so low res in comparison. For something like the HUD though, you can really see that they've gone in and remade a lot of the textures here, as it just looks way better than just the other textures that are clearly just upscaled. Then instances like this scene here where behind Jill and Barry, the wallpaper now hands down looks way better without a question, and it just shows how much effort went into replacing and up-resing textures themselves where they could. After fully exploring this SeamlessHD mod though, later on I found that there was a new upscaling mod that was out called RE Enhance, and this one is a lot better than SeamlessHD in my opinion. but it doesn't outright replace it. What this one does is go over the top of SeamlessHD and just basically makes it better. Here are some examples where the original is just very melty and waxy in its appearance, whereas this one is a lot more clearer and sometimes almost realistic, with stuff like wood on these pillars here looking a whole lot better. This doesn't convince me enough to totally recommend that this is an essential thing to get, but I do think that if you're gonna get a HD pack, this is the one that you should get. Or in fact, it's more like these are the 3 that you should get, because all of these mods just layer over the top of each other. Like for example, you need to get Resident Evil HD mod first installed, then you put SeamlessHD over the top of that, and then lastly putting this RE Enhanced mod over the top of all of it. The good thing is though, all of these are just drag and drop installs, so it's really quick to get set up. So I don't not recommend this mod. I think if you're doing a replay, then it's a perfect thing to re-experience the game. But I also just think it comes down to personal taste. For me, upscaling this era of textures is just a bit too much for me. If you like it though, this is the only version that supports it, so it might make the decision for you, to be honest. If you desperately want sharp textures, this is the only way to get it. What this original PC port really lacks though is true accessibility. It's hard to find and also set up if you don't know what you're doing. And the thing is, I would not recommend this version at all if it wasn't for the Rebirth mod basically taking it from the worst port that doesn't work to something that's basically perfect. But I know that not everyone is going to want to set this up, and it's easy for people like me or anyone watching this that really likes modding games to just say, oh, it's easy, just drag and drop a file when you're done. But a lot of people just do not want to do this, so I would avoid this version if you fit into that category. But that's where in 2022, GOG re-released the entire trilogy of games, making claims that you can just buy and play the game instantly on PC without having to do any setup at all. This release gives this game a lot of new life because it has full compatibility with Windows 10 and 11. It also has new rendering options such as windowed mode, VSync control, integer scaling, and anti-aliasing. There's also full support for modern controllers. The other amazing thing besides the technical stuff though, is the fact that this is the complete uncut version with the uncensored bits, so more blood and gore is going to be here than the original US release on PlayStation. So is this the definitive way to play the game that GOG claims? Well, there were a few small things at the start, like the fact that bilinear filtering is activated by default with seemingly no way to turn it off from what I could find, and the FMVs are extremely compressed like the original PC port. But it works literally flawlessly. I mean, since this is a really small game at only about 500 megabytes, I got from buying on the GOG store, downloading it and playing it within pretty much 8 minutes, which is such a huge achievement for a game released all the way back in 1996. It's also a really nice benefit that we get a settings menu before you load the game as well, as obviously the original doesn't have that built in. It also lets you add anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering without having to mess with any NVIDIA control panel. I'd recommend setting these both to max just to make sure that you're getting the best visuals. And please let me continue to glaze this port even more because it's actually fully compatible with the Rebirth mod as well as all of the other mods that I've showcased. You can change the game's region inside your GOG library settings, let it update, and then follow any instructions one-to-one with no problem at all. This means not only is it now the easier version to get over the MEDIAKITE version, but we can now also make it as good as it with the Rebirth mod installed. GOG doesn't support any achievements for these older games, so the only way to get that would be with the emulation option. This brings us to the last port of this video, which I know some of you that are unaware are probably thinking that this is going to be a throwaway as it's on the Nintendo DS. But not only is this version damn fun and interesting, but in a really strange turn of events, it's actually one of the best ways to play this game. MelonDS is the emulator that I'd recommend using here, and thankfully it's super straightforward, maybe even more than DuckStation is. You just download it, open it, map your controller buttons, load your ROM, and you're playing. I'd recommend some settings to change though to get the best experience. I like to set the screen layout to horizontal for DS games and then the screen sizing to emphasize top. This is extremely subjective though. Then in EMU settings I enabled JIT recompiler under CPU emulation as I think it smooths out the performance quite a bit. For video settings you should definitely switch the renderer to OpenGL so that you can upscale the game. Classic is fine as it splits the load between your CPU and GPU, but for anyone on a PC with a powerful GPU, but a low-end CPU, then Compute Shader would probably be a better fit, as it shifts the load over to your GPU. Then change your internal resolution to whatever you want. 10 times native is the one that I went with, and then leave everything else as is. The only other option you might want to turn on is VSync if you experience some screen tearing. Then under input, I just map my controller as I would with any other emulator, but one thing hidden here is that in order to get full screen working, you need to set it to a hotkey inside the general hotkeys tab. I recommend also whilst you're here setting swap screen emphasis to a key on your keyboard or controller so that you can switch between which screen is bigger if you need to say check your inventory. Going in game for the first time, you should go to options first and then set blur to red, as by default this is on green, probably due to some censorship stuff. Then there's two modes, classic and rebirth. Rebirth is a fun, albeit gimmicky experience where it uses the DS's features to add really cool elements to the gameplay, such as these on-rail moments where you swipe the pen across the screen to stab zombies. You can actually do this perfectly on PC if you want to using the mouse, so I honestly do recommend checking this out if you've already played the game and want a new fun way to experience it. But it's also really nice that they added the classic mode, as it's just the original game like the name implies. First impressions, the FMVs are super compressed to get them on the DS cartridge, and they're also the censored version. But then getting into actual gameplay, it was actually incredible. Like, what parallel universe are we in here where the DS version of all the versions provides this level of quality? For example, look at Jill's character model side by side. That's night and day difference. And the zombies too, they are so much higher res. The only downside I see to the visuals is the backgrounds. Not only are they crushed and compressed quite a lot to again fit them on the cartridge, but they're also just overly saturated. Performance is, well, phenomenal, with rapid load times and no stutter when switching camera angles. And also on top of that, there are some amazing quality of life features here. Not only do you get door skips, for example, but you also can skip the cutscenes too, which I think this is the only version that lets you do that. There's also a neat feature where if you hit the left bumper, you'll ready your knife instantly without having to equip it in an inventory. It's sort of a shame that we don't have this version ported to PC natively, as the whole two-screen thing can be sometimes annoying on PC, but it is kind of a blessing as well. Like having essentially a mini-map as well as an ammo counter is really nice to have. I also found that this version is pretty easy, by far the easiest of the bunch. The original PS1 Western version was definitely the hardest, and then the director's cut and PC ports are a little bit easier, but this is kind of a whole new type of easier. I was basically blitzing through zombies effortlessly. I just felt much faster in this game, and the weapons seemed to auto-aim really accurately. In summary though, wrapping up my whole experience with this, what a version this is. I can't believe I'm saying this, but the DS version is honestly so strong and was the highlight of all the versions that I tested. Is it the absolute best version that you can play though? Well, let's recap over every version that we've shown, their pros and cons, and who I think they're for, and find out. So the PS1 version that I'm dubbing the OG experience. For pros, it's dead simple to emulate and it's practically plug and play for the most part. It's not going to be the smoothest experience for those who have never emulated before, as emulation can be tricky to get your head around sometimes, but it's still extremely easy to set up. It's also the most customizable of the bunch. You get to fine tune the experience to be your perfect Resident Evil. Want to play in 8K with super sharp visuals? Sure. Or switch to software mode and throw on a CRT shader, and now you're having that pure experience. It gives you the option to just create the experience that you want to have. And for any achievement hunters out there, it's really great that this version supports retro achievements. This one feels smooth and responsive whilst also being the oldest version of the bunch, and therefore the most authentic as it's the original. And this is all thanks to emulation. The version differences also give you a lot of options, like the true director's cut ROM hack is perfect for any purists out there that want every single last drop of the original vision, and the original is arguably the most authentic way to play, despite it having some difficulty adjustments and lack of uncensored content. For cons, it's really lacking in any kind of quality of life besides the built-in DuckStation features like fast forward. This fast forward can let you skip door animations or cutscenes quite quickly, but things like no auto-aim on the original version and also no quick turn can make the whole experience feel really dated to today's standards. You also need to patch your ROM in order to get the best version. Now, I know I've said that it doesn't really matter. I still think it's worth noting that it's just going to be a headache for a lot of you to patch your own ROM, so I see it as a con that it lacks an easy version to go to in order to get the best of both worlds. Then we have the SEGA SATURN port, which I'm noting as the Curiosity port due to its quirks. For pros, it's got the exclusive battle mode, and there's quite a bit of fun to be had here if you're into that kind of repeatable arcade style gameplay loop. It's also just in total an interesting one visually. There are so many small visual differences and extra content that I didn't cover, making this quite the fascinating port to check out if you've played all the others to death. Cons unfortunately come pretty easy to this port though. Emulation is a janky nightmare that just isn't quite there yet. The smoothest one, Beetle, lacks basic features like internal resolution, and Kronos has some of those features but is buggy at the best of times. There's also just no real benefit over the other versions. The battle mode is cool, but there really isn't anything new here that truly stands out. Lastly, the original console that you're emulating just wasn't as strong as the PS1 at the time, making it overall visually not that good, performance-wise not that good, and also stuff like loading times, it's all gonna suffer here. The MEDIAKITE PC port, however, is a completely different story. This is the hidden gem but somewhat obsolete of the bunch. It's the full uncensored Japanese version featuring all of the cut content. It's also visually incredibly sharp, sometimes too sharp, requiring some anti-aliasing. This is by far the clearest that RE1 has ever looked. Quality of life thanks to the Rebirth mod is also in full swing with door skips and quick turns. And speaking of Rebirth, this mod is a saving grace for this one, taking it from a broken, messy port on modern PCs to not just playable, but some of the most stable and smooth experience that you're going to get, especially when combined with the FMV and audio mod, making everything just the highest quality possible. Mod support is also a factor. Not a major pro, as this scene is very small with only a handful of mods on, say Nexus mods, but things like playing as Ada that I saw on there would be pretty cool. And also the SeamlessHD mod that brings a lot of sharpness and clarity to those dated pre-rendered backgrounds. Lastly, performance and load times are unmatched, as of course it's running natively, no more stutters in between camera angles. Cons is that it outright needs patching to run properly, so if you're new to PC modding or just don't have the time, this is definitely not for you. It's also a bit of a pain to source legally. As it gets more old, it just gets more lost to time, and since the GOG version exists, it just makes this one more and more obsolete. And speaking of the GOG version, I want to title the easy mode in all of this. It's officially sold and easy to get. You can find an affiliate link down in the description to the GOG version if you end up going with that version, and using that link will help out the channel. It also is the most plug and play experience. It just works right out of the box, and honestly, you don't need anything to have a good time with this one. However, if you do want to take it that step further, it's also great that it's fully compatible with the classic Rebirth mod by just switching the region. It's also the uncut, uncensored version of the game. The FMVs are super compressed and the audio is too, but it's better than not having them. Lastly, it's just nice to have a modern launcher with a true config menu where you can set resolution, play in windowed mode, add things like anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering, and or switch on VSync. For pros, like I've mentioned, by default the FMVs are really bad. They're ultra compressed compared to their native versions. There's also a bilinear filter applied to all of the textures by default, with Rebirth being the only real way to take it off from what I could find. This isn't a total deal breaker, but GOG have done this with things like the MGS Integral port before, and I don't really know why they force it on, as I think a lot of people just prefer Nearest Neighbor. Finally, the goated DS port, the surprise contender. It's got the highest quality models. All of them are reimagined so well and make you feel like you're playing a remaster. It's also got really impressive performance, with everything just feeling buttery smooth. I didn't know DS emulation was this good until now, but yeah, no complaints here on this front. It also has the most quality of life features. You get all of the usual door skips, even cutscene skips, quick turns, a map and ammo counter always on the side thanks to the DS's dual screen nature, as well as a way to pull out your knife instantly whilst also having your gun equipped. All of this is very welcome. Rebirth mode I also see as a pro. It's a wild fun twist on the original. Is it gimmicky? Sure. But do I love it? Yeah. I'm a sucker for dumb stuff like this, and I think if you want a spin on the classic, then you should try it out. It's great that it works with the mouse on PC too. Lastly, it's ridiculously easy to emulate. This is my first time using MelonDS on Windows, and no joke, it took me like 10 minutes and I was already playing the game. For cons though, some of this stuff is heavily compressed, like audio, FMVs, and the backgrounds, more so than the PC ports. The backgrounds being oversaturated on this emulation version also leads to quite the art style shift that drifts away from the original look. The whole two-screen layout, whilst convenient, can also get in the way on PC. If you turn your monitor vertically and just have a big DS screen, which would look funny, that might work better, but for me, I really struggle to get a nice layout on a horizontal screen. It's also a bit easier than the original due to the quality of life stuff. I don't think it's a deal breaker and I don't think anyone should be turned off by this, but it does make you think that the lack of quality of life stuff that's in the original made it way more tense. Having no quick turns with the tank controls really does force you into rough spots, and here, because we have that, it feels like we have an overall speed increase. Maybe at this point I was just getting used to the game, but I was honestly speeding past zombies. Which leads us into some recommendations on which version I think best suit the certain type of player. If you're new to Resident Evil, I'm going to suggest the GOG version plus the Rebirth mod, and the 2 FMV and audio mods as well if you're willing to get those. It's easy to install and has modern bits like the door skips and quick turns, which is going to ease you into the dated mechanics, and best of all, no extra headaches like setting up an emulator. I think though the DS version is a strong second pick here. If you don't want to go with the GOG version and prefer the DS look, then I think you should go with that one. If you're returning to the series however, or you've just played it to death and are looking for something new, I heavily implore that you try out the DS version in either Classic or Rebirth mode. You will honestly have a blast. If anyone watching has a DS or a handheld, playing this version would be pretty cool as well. If you do end up doing it, please do show it in my Discord, links below. If however you're a purist looking for that OG vibe, then the PlayStation 1 version is the easy go-to. I'd recommend the director's cut over the original just for the added content, and then if you want to go that extra mile, get the true director's cut. Plus as a bonus, I implore you to put on a CRT shader and play it in software mode to get as close to that cozy CRT experience that we all had as a kid. What would be really cool though is if you have a CRT, just ditching the CRT shader and hooking up your PC to the CRT in order to get the best of both worlds. And that's the original game. Capcom might have dropped the ball with some of these re-releases, but thanks to fan efforts and companies like GOG, the legacy of this survival horror classic lives on really strong today. But now we're going to shift over and mention Resident Evil, not to be confused with Resident Evil. This to me is a completely different experience, almost an entirely different new game, one that I don't think replaces the original. The original has this B-movie feel to it with really colourful interiors, while this one strips down any colour and goes for that true horror experience. Now there's only 2 versions that we can play on PC, and I don't think that it's necessary for us to deep dive into this versions, as it's pretty cut and dry in my opinion. GameCube is where it was first released, so play that on Dolphin if you want the original experience. I tried this one out for a bit and was honestly shocked at how not perfect it was. I've never tried to actually emulate this version before, but I was getting huge stutters during cutscenes, but it's mainly because I usually run DirectX 11 3D on Dolphin due to wanting the maximum Uber shaders compatibility. So switching to Vulkan did fix this, but it never got rid of the stutters when you switch camera angles like we were getting in the original game. We were also locked to 30 FPS here with no patch from what I could find to make it 60. Anyway, here are the settings that I landed at in the end. Per pixel lighting is something that can cause issues in this game, as well as anisotropic filtering. If you have this set to 16 times, then it's going to cause seams on some of the textures, so it's best to just leave it at default. With the PC version, I had a much better, smoother experience. However, it's really important to note that if you don't use something like Fusion Fix, then you can't go above 1080p resolution. Now 1080p is still the dominant resolution, so I'm sure many of you don't care about this, but even if you don't need to go higher, this Fusion Fix adds a lot of different things that are very useful, such as options like door skips, changing the windowed mode that this game has to make it borderless windowed mode, and also when you set the frame rate to variable with this installed, it will actually uncap the FPS beyond 120, leading to an ultra smooth gameplay, especially for those on high refresh rate monitors. This is also just a drag and drop into the game files, so nothing crazy to get installed. With this, the PC version is just at a level of smoothness that the GameCube could never dream of reaching. Being able to play this at over 120 FPS is just perfect. This version is also a HD remaster by Capcom that adds a few things. Mainly the backgrounds here have been upscaled, not super well, but enough where they do add a little bit of clarity. There's also, alongside the original tank controls, an option to choose an alternate control scheme that's way more modern, letting you move in any direction that you want. It's important to note though that the game was made with tank controls in mind, so this does break the game's balancing a lot. Thank God that Capcom had this as an option instead of just replacing the tank controls, and also it's really nice that we can just switch it on and off through the control settings during gameplay. If it wasn't obvious, I'd recommend sticking to the original controls. It feels nice to move around, don't get me wrong, but it quickly will kill the tension of the game. I don't shame anyone either that uses it. I myself have personally used it on a second playthrough of the game, and especially for anyone that has a hard time with tank controls, go for it. Anyway, this version as a whole is really quick and easy to set up with only 2 issues that I'd recommend you fix. First one is the colours. They just aren't like the GameCube version, and so getting the GameCube shader mod fixes that. It also lets you toggle all of the effects that it adds or changes via the F1 to F4 keys. Other problem is the background music because it is pitched way higher and just plays at the wrong speed. To fix this you need a separate mod, but what I'd recommend instead is downloading Fluffy's mod manager because it has it built in. It's really easy to set up as well. All you need to do is drag its contents into a folder of your choosing, open it via the exe, click choose game and then point it towards your RE1 exe, and then just go downloads and then click fixed BGMs. Then to toggle a mod in this program, you just need to click mod list and there will be a toggle button. Now that you have this mod manager, it also opens up a huge modding potential for this version, and Nexus mods is chock full of cool ones that you should explore. For example, there are some that replace the sounds and UI elements of this game with the original 96 game, which is pretty cool. There's also a Retcon pack that fixes continuity errors, like Jill's outfit now being a greenish colour instead of the blue like the original. Then I also found a mod that brings back the director's cut basement track that we listened to earlier in the video, you know, if you want that clown fart experience back. FPS Fix is one that I'd get no matter what. This one actually needs to be downloaded manually by just copying the D3D9 DLL into your games directory. However, if you got the color correction shader mod from earlier, you're going to need to rename this DLL to something like fpsfix.dll, and then in dx9 settings.ini, and then remove the semicolon here before the word proxy on this line, and also change the directory so that it matches where your game is for your system. If you didn't name it fpsfix.dll as well, then you have to change that at the end of the line. Lastly, there's a mod that upscales textures, and it sharpens them up quite a considerate amount, but I really don't think this is necessary. The originals already look great to me, so I'd only do this if you want to. Besides mods, when you load into the game, you're going to be asked if you want to play in 16:9 or the original 4:3. Pretty self-explanatory stuff, but I highly recommend that you play in the original 4:3, as these pre-rendered backgrounds were not made with 16:9 in mind. The widescreen option does some pan, zoom and cropping in order to fit everything within that image without too much stretching, which is fine, but does cut off some of the content and makes whenever the camera zooms in or pans look really weird. Now I love both this and the original, the remake being my personal favourite of the two, but I think if you're new you should 100% play both of them back to back, as they're not really that long of a game. If you're returning, this doesn't really apply to you that much, but for everyone new, I think playing the original as Jill and then Chris in the remake is a perfect way to see the evolution here. In the original Japanese version, it's annotated that Jill is the easy mode and then Chris is the hard mode. So that way you kind of get used to the game mechanics by playing Jill in the first one, and then when you jump into the remake, you get to play as Chris on the harder difficulty. Both characters meet different characters during the story and have different elements here and there, so that's why I think it's important to play both the characters, and you might as well do one on the original and one on the remake. So to add this game into the mix, I'd recommend the GameCube Dolphin version only really for purists that want the original game experience. It's a no-brainer to go with that. Everyone else though, I just highly recommend the remaster on Steam. It's readily available and can be played just fine without any tinkering or mods. For anyone wanting something extra though, modding it in my opinion makes this version easily surpass the GameCube running on Dolphin, so if you're up for some modding, do that. Overall, for me personally, I would go with the GOG release with the Rebirth mod attached if I'm going to play the original, and then for the remake I'll play the Steam remaster with all of the mods that I've mentioned. Hopefully you found something in this video useful to you or just entertaining, and if you did, I'd really appreciate if you subscribed and liked the video. Also, let me know in the comments if this is your first time playing the game and which one you're going to go with. Or come talk in the community Discord, which will be linked down in the description, about Resident Evil or in general all things retro gaming. Big thanks to the supporters over on Patreon on screen now who support the channel. It's by far the best way to help me keep making content like this. You also get a role in our community Discord, behind the scenes content, early previews for upcoming content, and sometimes a video a day or two early, ad-free. If you're interested, you can join from just £1 a month. If you enjoyed this episode, how about you check out my other Best Way to Play episodes, like this one on screen now. See you over there.